It was a Halloween night I will never forget. Emma, my wife, and I decided to attend a Halloween party with some of our closest friends. I had suggested the idea a few weeks earlier, thinking it would be a fun way to break from the routine. Emma had been a bit hesitant at first, but after some convincing, she finally agreed, and we spent a few days leading up to the event picking out costumes. We settled on something simple yet classic, Emma dressed as a witch, complete with a long black dress, a pointed hat, and some face paint to give her that eerie, mysterious look. I, on the other hand, went as a vampire, donning a black cape, some fake fangs, and pale makeup that made me look like I had just crawled out of a crypt. We had a good laugh as we prepared, and the excitement of the upcoming party was starting to build. The event itself was held in a fancy restaurant on the 30th floor of a high-rise building downtown. It promised stunning views of the city skyline, which would be lit up with the glow of 1,000 lights. The party organizers had gone all out with the decorations. The restaurant had been transformed into a haunted mansion, complete with cobwebs, dim lighting, and eerie music that set the mood perfectly. When we arrived with our friends, we were immediately drawn into the festive atmosphere. The elevator ride up was filled with anticipation, and as the doors opened on the 30th floor, we were greeted by a spooky host who led us into the main hall. The place was packed with people dressed in all sorts of elaborate costumes. Some had gone for traditional looks, like ghosts, vampires, and zombies, while others had chosen more modern or humorous get-ups. Everywhere I looked, I saw a swirl of color and movement as people mingled, danced, and laughed. The night started off like any other party. Emma and I made our rounds, chatting with friends, grabbing drinks from the bar, and admiring everyone's costumes. The restaurant's rooftop terrace offered a breathtaking view of the city, and we stepped outside for a moment to take it all in. The cool October air felt refreshing after the warmth of the crowded dance floor, and we shared a quiet moment together, enjoying the twinkling lights below. As the night went on, the drinks kept flowing, and the music got louder. People started to loosen up, and soon the dance floor was packed. Emma had always been a great dancer, and she didn't waste any time joining in. I watched her from the side for a while, smiling at how much fun she seemed to be having. But then, something shifted. At first, it was just a subtle change. Emma had drifted away from our group and was now dancing with a guy I didn't recognize. He was dressed as some sort of medieval knight, and while his costume was impressive, something about the way he moved, the way he looked at Emma, made me uneasy. They were too close, too familiar, and I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. I tried to brush it off. It was just a party, after all, and everyone was having fun. But as I continued to watch, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. They were laughing, whispering things to each other, and at one point, I saw him touch her arm in a way that felt more than just friendly. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to convince myself that I was overreacting, that the alcohol was messing with my head. But deep down, I knew something was off. I watched as they danced together, their bodies moving in sync with the music, and I felt like an outsider in my own life, standing there while everything started to unravel before my eyes. I decided to approach them, my heart pounding in my chest. As I walked across the dance floor, pushing through the crowd, I tried to keep my composure. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was all in my head. But when I finally reached them, my worst fears were confirmed. The look on Emma's face wasn't one of guilt or embarrassment, it was something else entirely, something colder, something distant. "Jack," she exclaimed, a bit too cheerfully, as if she hadn't noticed the tension in my face. The guy next to her, the knight, looked at me with a smug smile, like he knew something I didn't. It was infuriating. "Who's this?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. I tried to keep it casual, but the words came out like a challenge. "Oh, this is Eric," Emma said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We were just dancing." Just dancing. The words echoed in my head, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I looked at her, trying to find the woman I had come to the party with, the woman I had spent years building a life with. But standing there in her witch costume, laughing with some guy I'd never met, she felt like a stranger. the rest of the night passed in a blur. I tried to shake off the feeling, tried to enjoy myself and mingle with friends, but my mind kept going back to that moment on the dance floor. Every time I looked over, Emma and Eric were still together, laughing, drinking, and moving closer than before. I couldn't take it anymore. I forced myself to turn away, pushing through the crowd and heading toward the bar. A cocktail, some conversation with friends, anything to shake this feeling. I couldn't let my mind wander down those dark paths. Emma and I had been together for years, and while we'd had our ups and downs, nothing like this had ever crossed my mind before. Why should it now? It was just a Halloween party. Just one night. As I approached the bar, I ran into a few of our friends. They were deep into their drinks, laughing and retelling stories from earlier in the night. I joined in, forcing a smile as I ordered a whiskey sour and tried to immerse myself in their conversation. The bartender handed me my drink, and I took a long sip, feeling the burn of the alcohol cut through the tension inside me. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe Emma was just having a good time, and this guy Eric was just a new friend, nothing more. The minutes stretched on, and I started to relax, sinking into the comfort of familiar faces and voices. We talked about everything and nothing, old memories, jokes about each other's costumes, and what we thought of the party. The music thumped in the background, a steady beat that matched the buzz of conversation around us. For a while, I was able to let go, the alcohol softening the edges of my thoughts. But no matter how hard I tried to stay present, my gaze kept drifting back to the dance floor. Each time I looked, though, Emma and Eric were nowhere to be seen. My drink started to feel heavy in my hand, and I could feel the unease creeping back in. Where had they gone? I brushed it off again, telling myself it was nothing. Emma was probably just taking a break, maybe grabbing a drink or stepping outside for some air. It was late, and we'd all had a bit to drink. I told myself to calm down, to stop acting like a jealous fool. But still, a nagging thought clung to the back of my mind, whispering that something was wrong. Eventually, the night wore on, and I realized how late it was getting. The crowd had thinned out, and the party was starting to wind down. I checked my phone, it was well past midnight. We should have left by now. It was time to find Emma and head home. I excused myself from my friends and made my way back toward the dance floor, scanning the room for her familiar figure. The once crowded space was quieter now, with only a few couples still swaying to the music. My eyes darted from face to face, but Emma wasn't there. Neither was Eric. My heart rate picked up, a quiet panic starting to brew. I walked around the perimeter of the room, checking every corner, hoping to see her chatting with someone else, laughing at some joke. But each step only confirmed what I already knew, they were gone. I moved outside to the rooftop terrace, hoping to find her leaning against the railing, gazing out at the city lights. It was cold up here, the wind biting through my costume as I scanned the terrace. A few guests were huddled around heaters, talking quietly, but Emma wasn't among them. Neither was Eric. That knot in my stomach from earlier returned, tighter than ever. I started replaying the night in my head, how close they'd been dancing, the way she'd laughed at his jokes, the easy familiarity between them. It didn't make sense. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself it was all in my head. Maybe they had just gone to get some air somewhere quieter, or maybe she'd left the party without telling me, thinking I'd catch up. I went back inside, searching again. The dance floor, the bar, even the hallway leading to the restrooms, nothing. I checked my phone, wondering if she had texted me, but there were no messages. The more I searched, the more frantic I became. Where could she be? I stopped near the elevators, staring at the doors as they slid open and closed, bringing people up and down the building. I waited, hoping to see her walk through those doors, smiling, telling me I was being ridiculous for worrying. But the minutes ticked by, and there was no sign of her. I decided to head downstairs, thinking maybe she had already gone to the lobby to wait for me. The elevator ride was agonizingly slow, each floor dragging on as my mind raced with all the possible explanations for why she had disappeared. When I finally reached the lobby, I stepped out and looked around, scanning the faces of the guests waiting for cabs or standing by the front doors. She wasn't there. I stood in the middle of the lobby, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. This wasn't like her. Emma wasn't the type to just disappear without a word, especially not at a party like this. And what about Eric? The thought of them leaving together twisted my gut in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. I checked my phone again, half hoping that she'd suddenly text me with some silly excuse or a quick message saying she'd gone ahead. But my screen remained blank, the minutes passing without any sign of her. I felt a cold sweat beginning to form on my forehead. Where were they? I decided to step outside, into the cool night air. I stood outside, the cool night air brushing against my face as I tried to gather my thoughts. My mind was spinning, replaying the entire night and every little interaction between Emma and Eric. Where could they have gone? Why hadn't she told me anything? As the minutes passed and my anxiety grew, I suddenly remembered something that made my heart race even more. Emma and I had recently connected each other's geolocation on our phones, mostly as a convenience to keep track of each other during busy days or trips. Now, I was grateful for that small, seemingly insignificant decision. With shaky hands, I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the app. I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering over her name. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be that kind of husband, the one who needed to track his wife. But the pit in my stomach was telling me something wasn't right, and I had to know. I tapped her name, and after a few seconds, a small dot appeared on the screen. My heart pounded as I saw that she was still in the building, on the same floor, in fact, still in the restaurant. Relief flooded over me, but it was quickly followed by confusion. I had just been upstairs, looking everywhere, and I hadn't seen her. Where could she be hiding? I pushed through the front doors and made my way back to the elevator, riding it up to the 30th floor again. The eerie music still played softly through the speakers, and the dim, haunted house atmosphere felt more oppressive now that I was on edge. I exited the elevator, following the map on my phone, watching as the little dot that represented Emma's location guided me. She hadn't left the party, she was still here. But as I got closer, I realized something strange. She wasn't anywhere near the dance floor or the bar. The map led me down a side hallway, away from the noise of the party, where fewer people seemed to be. My footsteps echoed against the marble floors as I moved, and the further I walked, the more unsettling it became. According to the app, Emma was close, very close. But she wasn't in the main restaurant or mingling with other guests. The dot on my phone was guiding me toward a more secluded area of the restaurant, away from the music and the laughter. And then it hit me. The path I was on was leading directly toward the restrooms. My heart skipped a beat, and my mouth went dry as I continued walking, the dim lighting making every shadow seem more sinister. The closer I got to the restrooms, the louder the pounding in my chest became. I tried to convince myself that this was nothing, that maybe she had just slipped away for a moment, maybe to fix her makeup or step away from the crowd. But the gnawing feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I reached the end of the hallway where the restrooms were, and I paused for a moment, staring at the door. The hallway was empty, silent except for the muffled thump of the party music far off in the distance. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Emma had to be inside. It was the only explanation. But if she was, where was Eric? My hand hovered over the restroom door, but I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I was jumping to conclusions? But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. I turned away from the women's restroom and instead stood quietly near the hallway, my ears straining to hear anything, any sound that would give me a clue as to what was happening on the other side of that door. The seconds dragged on like hours, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for something, anything, to make sense of the situation. Finally, I heard it. Soft voices, low and muffled, coming from inside. They were too quiet to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't a casual conversation. It wasn't just Emma fixing her makeup or checking her phone. I clenched my fists, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to burst through the door, to catch her in whatever she was doing and confront her right then and there. But another part of me, the part that was terrified of what I might find, wanted to turn around, to leave and pretend none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't walk away. Not now. I had come this far, and I had to know the truth. I steeled myself and approached the restroom door again, this time more determined. I knocked softly at first, but there was no answer. The voices inside grew quiet, as if they had been startled. My heart raced. I knocked again, harder this time, my pulse thudding in my ears. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door cracked open just enough for me to see. Emma stood there, her face pale and her expression caught somewhere between surprise and guilt. Behind her, I could see Eric, his face flushed and his shirt untucked, standing awkwardly in the corner of the small restroom. My heart sank. "Jack," Emma said, her voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't even speak for a moment. The sight of them together in such an intimate, private space was enough to confirm every fear I had been trying to push away all night. The tension in the air was palpable, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "What am I doing here?" I finally managed to say, my voice thick with disbelief. "What are you doing here, Emma?" She glanced back at Eric, who avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in his spot. The guilt in her eyes was unmistakable now. She tried to say something, anything to explain, but no words came out. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, the weight of the situation crashing down all at once. This wasn't just some innocent conversation. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. "I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't want to hear it. Not anymore. I turned and walked away, leaving the rest of the night, and everything I thought I knew, behind me. "What am I doing here, Emma?" "You're my wife." The words came out of my mouth sharper than I intended, fueled by a surge of anger and disbelief. I felt my pulse racing in my temples, the frustration boiling over as I tried to comprehend what I had just walked into. Without thinking, I grabbed Eric by the collar and pulled him away from her, shoving him toward the door. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with fear and surprise, clearly not expecting me to react the way I did. I wanted to hit him, wanted to do something to release the rage building up inside of me, but I held back. Barely. Emma stood there, her eyes glazed over, unsteady on her feet. It was then that I realized she was drunk, too drunk to even fully grasp the gravity of what was happening. Her head lolled slightly as she leaned against the wall, and she mumbled something incoherent, slurring her words. The sight of her in that state made me feel even worse. She wasn't herself, not the woman I knew. But that didn't change what had happened. The fact that she had ended up here, with Eric, hidden away in a bathroom during a party, was enough to send my mind spiraling. I didn't know what to do with all of it, the anger, the confusion, the betrayal swirling together in a tangled mess inside me. But one thing was clear, I needed to get her out of there. I couldn't stand to look at either of them any longer. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and called a taxi. It took everything in me to stay calm, to not explode in that moment. I just needed to get Emma home, to get away from the situation before I said or did something I'd regret. As we waited for the cab, I kept a cold, silent distance from her. Eric had already slipped away, disappearing like a coward before I could confront him any further. Emma leaned against the wall, her eyes fluttering closed, barely able to stay upright. When the taxi finally arrived, I half-guided, half-carried her inside, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a stone. The ride home was quiet, the only sound coming from the hum of the engine and the occasional drunken murmur from Emma. She slumped against the window, her head resting on the glass, lost in whatever foggy haze she was in. I stared straight ahead, my mind racing, trying to process everything that had happened. How did we get here? How had the night gone so wrong? Then, as the taxi turned onto our street, Emma mumbled something that made my blood run cold. "Eric, kiss me," she whispered, her voice soft and dreamy, as if she were talking to him in her sleep. I froze, the words stabbing into me like a knife. I felt my stomach churn, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it, with such casual intimacy, as if she had been in this moment with him before. As if it were normal. We arrived home, and I helped her inside, though I could barely look at her. She was too out of it to notice, too far gone to understand the weight of what she had just said. I put her to bed, her eyes fluttering closed as soon as her head hit the pillow. But I couldn't rest. I couldn't even sit still. While she slept, the house was unbearably quiet, but my mind was anything but. Her words echoed in my head, over and over, mixing with the memory of seeing her in that bathroom with Eric. I was filled with disbelief, rage, and most of all, helplessness. What was I supposed to do? What could I do? I had no proof of anything beyond what I'd seen, but the way she'd called out to him, even in her sleep, made it clear that something had happened, something more than just dancing. I stayed up most of the night, pacing the house, my thoughts racing in circles. I tried to make sense of it all, but nothing fit. Nothing made sense. I felt like a fool, a husband who had been blindsided by something he never saw coming. How long had this been going on? How deep did this connection between her and Eric run? When morning finally came, I was exhausted but still running on adrenaline. I waited for Emma to wake up, my mind set on confronting her, demanding answers. When she finally stirred, blinking sleepily in the light filtering through the window, I wasted no time. "What happened yesterday, Emma?" I asked, my voice flat, barely able to contain my anger. "Do you even remember?" She blinked at me, still groggy, her expression one of confusion. I don't know," she muttered, rubbing her temples. "I remember dancing, and drinking." "Why?" Her casual response made my anger flare up again. Dancing? That's all she remembered? After everything that had happened, after what I'd seen and heard, she had the nerve to act like it was just another night out? Dancing? I repeated, my voice rising. "Is that all you remember?" "Because I remember finding you in the bathroom with Eric. I remember you calling out his name in your sleep. Do you really not remember any of that?" Emma's eyes widened, and she sat up, looking at me with genuine confusion. "What? No, Jack, I don't remember that. I was drunk, That's not an excuse," I snapped, unable to hold back any longer. "You were with him, Emma. In the bathroom. What am I supposed to think?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know, Jack. I don't know what happened. I just remember drinking too much and dancing." Her words only made me angrier. She was brushing it off like it was nothing, like it was just some mistake made in a drunken haze. But it wasn't nothing. It couldn't be nothing. Not after everything I'd seen and heard. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I have no proof," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "But something happened, Emma. Something you're not telling me." She didn't respond, just sat there, staring at me with wide, teary eyes, as if she didn't know how to explain herself. And maybe she didn't. Maybe I would never know the full truth. But that didn't make the betrayal feel any less real. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence, the weight of everything hanging between us like a storm waiting to break. I sat alone in the living room, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. I couldn't shake the image of Emma and Eric in that bathroom, the way she had called out his name in her sleep. It played on a loop in my head, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I never could have imagined that when my wife drank, she was capable of doing something like this, something that felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. The more I thought about it, the worse I felt. If this was how she acted when she drank, then what was stopping her from doing it again? What was stopping her from being unfaithful the next time she had a few too many drinks at a party or out with friends? It wasn't just about last night anymore, it was about what this meant for our marriage, for the future. Could I even trust her anymore? That thought gnawed at me, sinking deeper into my mind with every passing minute. If Emma was capable of getting that close to another man when she was drunk, then how long would it be before she went further? What if it wasn't just Eric? What if this was part of who she was when alcohol took control? The thought made me sick, a tight knot forming in my stomach. Why would I want a wife who could betray me so easily, with so little regard for our relationship? I buried my face in my hands, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had never imagined that this was the kind of marriage I would end up in, with doubt and mistrust creeping in where there used to be love and security. I had always thought we were solid, that nothing could come between us. But now, those foundations felt shaky, fragile. Footsteps approached from the hallway, soft and hesitant. I didn't need to look up to know it was Emma. I could hear the unease in her step, the way she was unsure of how to approach me. I didn't move, didn't say anything as she stood there, waiting for me to acknowledge her. After a few moments of tense silence, I finally lifted my head, my eyes meeting hers. She looked wrecked, her face pale, her eyes red from crying, and her hands trembling at her sides. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not after what I had seen. Not after what I had heard. "Jack," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting to hear what she had to say, but I wasn't sure if I was even capable of forgiving her at this point. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I don't remember everything, but I know I messed up. Please, please forgive me." She took a step closer, her knees buckling slightly as she struggled to hold herself together. I watched as she slowly dropped to the floor, falling to her knees in front of me. She reached out, her hands trembling as she grabbed onto my legs, clinging to me like she was holding on for dear life. "Please, Jack," she begged, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'll do anything. I'll make it right. I swear to you, I'll never let anything like this happen again. I just need you to forgive me." Her tears were falling freely now, streaming down her cheeks as she looked up at me, her face a picture of desperation. She was pleading with me, practically begging on her knees for me to let this go, to move past it. But how could I? How could I forgive her when I wasn't even sure what had really happened? The doubt was there, festering inside me, and it wasn't going to disappear just because she was crying and asking for forgiveness. I had seen the way she had looked at Eric. I had heard her call his name in her sleep. Those were the images and sounds that would haunt me, no matter how much she apologized or promised it wouldn't happen again. I looked down at her, at the woman I had spent years with, the woman I had thought I would spend the rest of my life with, and I felt a deep, aching sadness settle into my chest. How had we ended up here? How had everything gone so wrong? "Emma," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say. You say you don't remember, but that's not enough for me. You were with him, in the bathroom, and I don't know what happened, but it's not just about that. It's about what you said in your sleep. You were dreaming about him, Emma. You called out his name." Her eyes widened, her expression filled with horror as if she hadn't realized the full extent of what had happened. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Jack, I didn't mean it. I swear, it wasn't like that. I don't feel anything for him, I don't know why I said that. I was drunk, I didn't know what I was saying." I stood up, gently pushing her hands off me as I moved away from her. I couldn't sit there any longer, couldn't let her try to explain it all away as if it were nothing. "It doesn't matter, Emma," I said, my voice breaking. "It doesn't matter if you were drunk. It doesn't matter if you don't remember. The fact is, you let yourself get into that situation in the first place. And now, I don't know if I can trust you anymore." She let out a soft sob, collapsing onto the floor in front of me, her body trembling with the weight of everything. "Please, Jack, don't say that. Please don't give up on us. I love you. I made a mistake, but I'll do anything to fix it. I can't lose you." Her words echoed in the room, hanging heavy in the air between us. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing that she was hurting, that she was genuinely remorseful. But I also knew that this wasn't something that could be easily fixed. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. And right now, I didn't know if I had it in me to forgive her. I looked down at her one last time, my heart breaking as I watched the woman I had loved for so long reduced to this. But despite the pain, despite the anger, I couldn't make myself say the words she wanted to hear. I need some time, I said, my voice hollow. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. With that, I walked out of the room, leaving Emma on the floor, her sobs echoing behind me as I closed the door. The day I came home drunk, everything felt like a blur. The whiskey had done its job of numbing the pain, but it couldn't erase the deep confusion and sorrow I was carrying inside me. I had spent hours at the bar after leaving the house that morning, trying to drown out the images of Emma and Eric, trying to forget the doubt gnawing at the edges of my mind. But no matter how many drinks I had, no matter how many times I tried to convince myself it would all be okay, the truth kept creeping back in. I didn't know what to do anymore. When I finally stumbled through the front door, the house was quiet. The lights were dimmed, casting a soft glow over the living room. I didn't even bother taking off my shoes. The smell of something warm and comforting wafted from the kitchen, but it did little to ease the weight in my chest. The house felt like a place I didn't belong in anymore, like everything familiar had suddenly turned foreign. Then, I saw her. Emma was standing in the dining room, dressed in a beautiful dark blue dress, her hair done up, looking like she had put in so much effort to make things right. The table was set for two, with candles flickering softly and a home-cooked dinner waiting. She had gone all out, trying to create a perfect evening, as if that would erase everything that had happened between us. As if a nice dinner could somehow fix the broken pieces of our marriage. Her face lit up when she saw me, but the hope in her eyes quickly faded when she noticed the state I was in. I could see her trying to gauge my mood, trying to figure out what kind of man had walked through that door, whether I was angry, sad, or just lost. "Jack," she said softly, stepping toward me, her voice tentative, like she didn't know whether I'd lash out or collapse. "I made dinner. I thought we could talk." But I couldn't respond. I couldn't even look at her. All I could think about was the mess I was in, the mess we were in. I leaned against the wall, my legs giving out from under me, the weight of everything too much to carry anymore. The whiskey, the emotional exhaustion, it all hit me at once, and before I knew it, I had slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor. And then I started crying. I didn't even know where the tears were coming from, but they flowed freely, each sob shaking me from the inside out. It wasn't just about what had happened with Eric. It was everything, the years we had spent together, the life we had built, the trust that was now hanging by a thread. I didn't know what choice to make. I didn't know whether I should forgive her, try to move past this, or walk away. And the indecision, the pain of it all, was crushing me. Emma stood there for a moment, her expression crumbling as she watched me break down in front of her. I saw the tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Instead, she knelt down beside me, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch my arm. She pulled me into her embrace, wrapping her arms around me as I cried into her shoulder. I could feel her shaking too, her own silent sobs mixing with mine. Her warmth, her closeness, it was a strange comfort in the middle of the storm I was trapped in. For a moment, I let myself lean into her, let myself forget about everything that had gone wrong, just for a few seconds. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice broken. "I'm so sorry, Jack. Please, just don't leave me." Her words cut through me, but I didn't have the strength to respond. I didn't know if I could say anything that would make sense. My mind was spinning, my heart aching, and the alcohol in my system wasn't helping me think clearly. I felt lost, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff and didn't know whether to jump or walk away. We stayed there on the floor, clinging to each other in the quiet of the house, the dinner forgotten, the candles burning down to their wicks. Emma's embrace was tight, as if she was afraid that if she let go, I would slip away forever. And maybe she was right. I pulled away slightly, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, trying to get control of myself. I don't know what to do, Emma, I admitted, my voice hoarse from crying. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I don't even know if I want to. Her face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I'll do anything, Jack. Anything to make it right. I just need you to give me another chance. Please. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, the woman who had just shattered my heart, and I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to forgive her and move on. But another part of me, the part that had seen her with Eric, that had heard her call his name, was screaming that this wasn't something I could just get over. That it was too late. The silence stretched between us, heavy and painful. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to bridge the gap that had opened up between us. All I knew was that I was drowning in doubt, and I didn't know how to pull myself back up. I can't just forget what happened, I finally said, my voice quiet but firm. I can't just pretend like everything's okay. You hurt me, Emma. You broke something inside me, and I don't know if it can be fixed. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face, her hands clinging to mine like they were the only thing keeping her grounded. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. But I love you, Jack. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please, just don't give up on me. Don't give up on us. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love was enough to fix what had been broken. But as I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of our relationship, I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure if love was enough. And that terrified me more than anything else.